There comes a moment in every person's life when they wake up and realize they no longer fit into the world they once called home. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with thunder or revelation. Instead, it arrives quietly, like the first light of dawn creeping through curtains you forgot to close. You're sitting across from old friends, hearing the same conversations you've heard 1,000 times before, and suddenly you feel it, a distance so vast it seems unbridgeable, a silence so profound that no words can cross it. Alan Watts understood this peculiar form of suffering better than most. He recognized that personal evolution, that beautiful and necessary unfolding of consciousness, often carries with it an unexpected price: isolation. Not the isolation of physical loneliness, but something far more subtle and painful. The isolation of being surrounded by people who knew the old you and cannot see, cannot understand, cannot relate to who you're becoming. You haven't left them. You haven't abandoned your roots. But something fundamental has shifted inside you, and that shift makes you unrecognizable to those who loved the person you used to be. This transformation begins with what Watts called the awakening, a growing awareness that the life you've been living, the identity you've been performing, the beliefs you've been clutching are not truly yours. They were inherited, absorbed, conditioned into you by family, culture, religion, and society. For years, perhaps decades, you wore these beliefs like clothing, never questioning whether they actually fit. You operated from a script written by others, playing a role in a theater you didn't choose, speaking lines that felt increasingly hollow with each repetition. But consciousness, once it begins to expand, cannot be contained. You start to question everything. The career path that once seemed so important now feels like a gilded cage. The relationships built on shared illusions begin to crack under the weight of your newfound clarity. The values you were taught to cherish, status, security, conformity, start to reveal themselves as mechanisms of control rather than paths to fulfillment. This questioning isn't rebellion for its own sake. It's the natural response of an authentic self beginning to emerge from beneath layers of social conditioning. Watts taught that we are not static entities, despite our desperate attempts to believe otherwise. The idea of a permanent, unchanging I is perhaps the most persistent illusion we maintain. We cling to our identities, our roles, our achievements, our narratives about who we are, because the alternative seems terrifying. If I'm not the person I was yesterday, the person people expect me to be, the person my resume describes, then who am I? This question terrifies the ego, because the ego's entire existence depends on maintaining the illusion of permanence. But here's what Watts recognized with such clarity. You are not a thing. You are a process. You are not a noun, but a verb, a continuous, flowing, changing, evolving movement of consciousness experiencing itself through this particular form. Every cell in your body replaces itself over time. Every thought you have arises and dissolves. Every emotion passes like weather through the sky of your awareness. The only constant is change. And to resist this fundamental truth is to resist life itself. When you begin to truly understand this, when you feel it not just intellectually, but in your bones, something shifts. You start to release your grip on the old identity. You stop defending the person you used to be. You allow the rigid boundaries of your self-concept to soften and dissolve. And this is precisely when the pain begins, because everyone else is still relating to the old you. They're still addressing the ghost of who you were, expecting you to react the way you always have, to want what you always wanted, to care about what you always cared about. Your parents look at you with confusion and concern, wondering why you no longer share their priorities. Your siblings accuse you of becoming distant or strange, as if your growth is a betrayal of family loyalty. Your old friends make jokes that no longer land, reference shared memories that feel like they belong to someone else, and gradually, without anyone explicitly deciding it, the invitations slow down. The calls become less frequent. The connection fades not through conflict, but through incompatibility. This is the silent pain Watts spoke of, the ache of transformation that happens in private while you still move through a public world. No one throws you a party for outgrowing your old self. No one celebrates the death of your false identity. There are no rituals, no ceremonies, no acknowledgement of what you're going through. Society celebrates births and mourns deaths, but the countless small deaths that happen within us as we evolve, the death of old beliefs, old patterns, old versions of ourselves, these go unrecognized, unwitnessed, ungrieved. You begin to feel like you're living in two worlds simultaneously. There's the world of your inner transformation, rich with new insights, alive with possibility, trembling with the vulnerability of not knowing who you're becoming. And there's the external world, which demands you remain consistent, predictable, understandable. At work, you maintain the professional persona. At family gatherings, you play the expected role. With old friends, you laugh at the right moments, nod at the appropriate times, speak the language they understand, even though it no longer reflects your inner reality. Watts described this as the condition of the person who has begun to wake up within the dream. You see others still fully immersed in their illusions, chasing status, accumulating possessions, defending their egos, clinging to certainties, and you cannot pretend anymore to care about these pursuits with the same urgency they do. But neither can you condemn them, because you recognize that they're exactly where they need to be, in their own unfolding. Judgment would only create more separation, more suffering. So you practice what Watts called compassionate detachment. You love them, but you cannot live as they do. You honor their path, but you cannot abandon your own. The temptation during this phase is to either retreat completely or to try desperately to make others understand. Both strategies fail. Complete retreat leads to spiritual bypassing, using your growth as an excuse to avoid the messiness of human relationship. Trying to convert others to your new perspective creates friction and further alienation, because consciousness cannot be forced. It can only unfold in its own time, through each person's unique journey. What Watts taught instead was the practice of presence without pretense. Show up as you are, even when no one understands. Speak your truth gently, even when it's received with skepticism. Live according to your emerging understanding, even when it makes others uncomfortable. This isn't about proving anything or defending your transformation. It's about honoring the integrity of your own unfolding, trusting that authenticity carries its own authority. But make no mistake, this path is lonely. There will be moments when you ache for someone who truly sees you, who understands the territory you're navigating, who speaks the language of your new consciousness. The old connections that once sustained you now feel shallow. Small talk becomes unbearable. Surface-level interactions drain rather than energize you. You're hungry for depth, for real conversation, for connection that doesn't require you to shrink or perform or explain. This hunger is not weakness. It's the natural response of an evolving consciousness seeking resonance. Watts understood that while the journey inward is solitary, we are not meant to walk the path completely alone. The question is not whether you need companionship, but what kind of companionship nourishes the truth of who you're becoming, rather than reinforcing the illusion of who you were. The pain of outgrowing your old self while no one understands is a sacred pain. It's the friction of consciousness expanding against the boundaries of its former container. It's the discomfort of a caterpillar dissolving in the chrysalis, neither what it was, nor yet what it will be. And like all sacred pain, it serves a purpose. It burns away what's false, leaving only what's real. It strips you of the comfort of fitting in, forcing you to find comfort in your own being. It removes the crutch of external validation, teaching you to trust your own inner knowing. Watts would say this is exactly as it should be. The process of awakening necessarily involves a period of disorientation, disconnection, and what he called the dark night of the soul. This isn't a sign you've gone wrong. It's confirmation you're going right, because genuine transformation cannot happen within the safety of consensus reality. It requires you to step outside the circle, to venture into unknown territory, to release your grip on everything familiar and allow yourself to be reshaped by forces you cannot control or predict. To truly understand the philosophy of outgrowing your old self, we must confront something most people spend their entire lives avoiding: the fact that who you think you are is not real. Alan Watts dedicated much of his teaching to dismantling the illusion of the fixed self, that persistent sense of I that feels so solid, so continuous, so fundamentally real. Yet this I that you defend, that you worry about, that you try so desperately to improve and protect, Watts argued it's a fiction, a story told so consistently that we mistake it for truth. Think about it for a moment. Who are you really? Are you your name that was given to you by others? Are you your body? Every atom in that body has been replaced multiple times. Are you your memories? But memories are notoriously unreliable, constantly being rewritten with each recollection. Are you your thoughts? Those thoughts arise and dissolve moment by moment, none of them permanent, most of them repetitive patterns inherited from culture and conditioning. Are you your achievements? Those exist only as interpretations of past events, stories you tell about yourself that could be narrated entirely differently. Are you your relationships? Those define you in relation to others, but what about you exists independent of those connections? Watts pointed to this fundamental mystery at the heart of existence. When you look for the self, truly look with honest inquiry, you cannot find it. Not because you're looking in the wrong place, but because there is no separate, independent, permanent self to find. What we call I is actually a process, a flowing together of sensations, perceptions, thoughts, and consciousness that we artificially freeze into a conceptual entity. We do this because the mind craves solidity. It wants permanence in a universe where everything is impermanent. It wants control in a reality where everything is interdependent. It wants certainty in an existence that is fundamentally mysterious. This illusion of the fixed self is not accidental. It's cultivated from the moment you're born. Society needs you to believe in your separate self because that's what makes you governable, controllable, predictable. If you believe you are a separate individual competing with other separate individuals for limited resources, you'll behave in ways that maintain the existing social structures. You'll work jobs you don't love to buy things you don't need to impress people you don't like. You'll sacrifice your present happiness for a future security that never quite arrives. You'll compare yourself to others, measuring your worth by external standards, always falling short, always anxious, always seeking validation. This is what Watts called the ego game, the endless project of self-improvement based on the assumption that you are fundamentally inadequate and need to become something other than what you are. The ego thrives on this sense of lack. It says, I'm not good enough yet. But if I just work harder, achieve more, fix these flaws, acquire these qualities, then I'll finally be acceptable, worthy, complete. And so you spend years, decades, perhaps your entire life in pursuit of becoming, never realizing that the one who is trying to become is itself the obstacle to your freedom. When transformation begins, when consciousness starts to expand beyond the boundaries of ego, this whole structure begins to collapse, and the collapse feels like death, because in a very real sense, it is death. Not the death of your body, but the death of your identity, your self-concept, everything you've believed yourself to be. The ego experiences this as annihilation. It fights back with every weapon in its arsenal: fear, doubt, anxiety, depression, self-sabotage, illness, drama, anything to avoid the dissolution it senses approaching. This is why Watts spoke so often about dying before you die. He wasn't being poetic or mystical. He was pointing to a literal psychological process that must occur for genuine awakening to happen. The old self, the collection of beliefs, patterns, defenses, and identities that make up your current sense of I, must die, not violently, not through force or punishment, but through gentle, conscious letting go. Each time you release an attachment, an identification, a belief about who you are, a small death occurs. And though the ego screams in protest, what actually dies is only what was never real to begin with. What makes this process so difficult is that identity death doesn't happen all at once. It's not like you wake up one morning and the old you is completely gone. Instead, it happens gradually in waves, with periods of dissolution followed by periods of integration. You might have a profound insight that shatters a long-held belief, experience weeks of clarity and freedom, and then find yourself suddenly regressing back into old patterns, wondering if any progress was made at all. This is normal. This is how consciousness evolves, not linearly but spirally, revisiting old territory from new perspectives, integrating lessons layer by layer. Watts used the metaphor of molting to describe this process. Like a snake shedding its skin or a crab abandoning its shell, you must periodically release the structures that once protected you, but now constrain your growth. Each identity you inhabit serves a purpose for a time. The ambitious, career-focused version of you might have been necessary to establish security. The people-pleasing version might have been essential for survival in your family system. The intellectual version might have helped you make sense of confusion. None of these identities were wrong or bad. They were appropriate to their time and conditions. But just as you outgrew the clothes you wore as a child, you outgrow these psychological identities. The problem is that unlike physical clothing, which obviously no longer fits, psychological identities can be clung to long past their usefulness. You can keep squeezing yourself into an outdated self-concept, tightening and restricting your natural expansion, all while insisting that this is who you really are. This creates immense suffering. The suffering of living inauthentically, of denying your own growth, of betraying your emerging truth to maintain consistency with your past. The moment you recognize this, truly see how you've been imprisoning yourself in an identity that no longer serves, is both liberating and terrifying. Liberation, because suddenly you realize you are not trapped. You can change, you can let go, you can become. Terror, because if you're not who you thought you were, then who are you? This question haunts the process of transformation. In the space between identities, in the gap between the old self dying and the new self emerging, there is what spiritual traditions call the dark night of the soul, a period of profound disorientation where all your reference points dissolve and you have nothing solid to stand on. Watts taught that this disorientation is not something to avoid or rush through. It's the fertile void, the creative emptiness from which genuine newness can emerge. If you immediately grab onto a new identity to replace the old one, you've missed the point. The goal is not to trade one fixed self for another. The goal is to discover what you are beyond all fixed identities, the awareness that witnesses all identities arising and passing, the consciousness that remains present through all transformations, the being that was never born and can never die. This is what mystics throughout history have pointed to with different words: the true self, Buddha nature, Atman, Christ consciousness, the Tao. Not a thing to be attained, but your deepest nature to be recognized. Watts brilliantly brought these Eastern concepts to Western audiences by stripping away the religious language and pointing directly to the experiential reality. You are not a separate self navigating through a foreign universe. You are the universe experiencing itself through this particular focal point of consciousness. The boundary between you and everything else is conceptual, not actual. When you look deeply enough, you find that you are intimately connected to all of existence, not as a separate wave is connected to the ocean, but as the ocean is expressing itself as wave. This realization changes everything and nothing simultaneously. You still have a personality, still have preferences and responsibilities, still have a name and a history, but your identification with these things loosens. You begin to hold your identity lightly, playfully, recognizing it as a temporary role rather than your permanent essence. This allows incredible freedom. You can participate fully in life without being destroyed by failure or inflated by success, because you know that neither failure nor success touches what you truly are. But here's the paradox Watts loved to illuminate. You cannot force this realization. You cannot think your way into it or achieve it through effort. The very trying is a function of the ego attempting to survive by becoming spiritual or awakened. True transformation happens when you stop trying to transform, when you release the project of self-improvement and simply allow yourself to be as you are. Not passively, not with resignation, but with radical acceptance of what is. This doesn't mean you stop growing or changing. It means the growth happens organically, naturally, without the violence of the ego whipping you toward an imagined future perfection. Like a flower opening in response to sunlight, consciousness expands in response to awareness. The more you simply observe yourself without judgment, watching your thoughts arise and dissolve, feeling your emotions move through like weather, noticing your patterns without identifying with them, the more those patterns lose their grip. Not because you fought them, but because you stopped feeding them with resistance. This is the art of dying consciously that Watts taught. Each moment offers an opportunity for small death, releasing the need to be right, letting go of a cherished opinion, surrendering control, accepting uncertainty. These small deaths are rehearsals for the big death, the ultimate letting go that comes at the end of every life. But they're also portals to freedom right now, in this moment, while you're still breathing. Every time you die to who you were an instant ago, you create space for fresh life to move through you. Every time you release an identity, you become more fluid, more adaptable, more aligned with the natural flow of existence. This is why outgrowing your old self, though painful, is ultimately a gift. It's life inviting you to stop pretending, to drop the masks, to release the exhausting performance of being someone you're not. The people who don't understand your transformation are often those most invested in your old identity, because it served their needs, reflected their values, confirmed their worldview. Your evolution challenges them not because you're judging them, but because your very existence raises questions they're not ready to face. What if I, too, am more than my current identity? What if I, too, could change? What if everything I believe about myself is negotiable? These are dangerous questions for those comfortable in their current conception of self. Your transformation is a mirror showing them the possibility of their own, and mirrors can be threatening when we've grown attached to a particular reflection. So they resist. They dismiss your changes as a phase. They pathologize your growth as instability. They pressure you to return to the familiar, comfortable person you used to be, not out of malice, but out of their own fear of change. Watts would say, let them resist. Your job is not to convince anyone, not to defend your transformation, not to make others comfortable with your growth. Your job is simply to remain true to the unfolding of your own consciousness, to honor the intelligence of life as it moves through you, to trust the process even when it leads you into unknown territory. The caterpillar cannot explain to other caterpillars what it's like to fly. It must complete its transformation in solitude, trusting an intelligence beyond its comprehension, surrendering to a process it cannot control. You are in the chrysalis. The old form is dissolving. What emerges will be unrecognizable to those who knew only the caterpillar. This is not tragedy. This is the natural cycle of death and rebirth that runs through all of existence. Trust it, allow it. Die consciously to what you were, and in that death, discover what you've always been. And so we arrive at the paradox that Alan Watts spent his life illuminating. The moment you stop needing to be understood is the moment you finally understand. The silent pain of outgrowing your old self while no one comprehends what you're experiencing. This pain is temporary. What remains after it passes is something infinitely more valuable than the comfort of external validation. What remains is the quiet freedom of knowing yourself, not as the world defined you, but as you truly are. There is a peace that comes from no longer performing for an audience. There is a lightness that comes from releasing the burden of consistency. There is a joy that comes from living authentically, even in the face of confusion or judgment from others. This is not the joy of ecstatic highs or dramatic victories. It is the subtle, enduring contentment of alignment, when what you do, what you say, and what you are become one seamless expression. What's taught that you are not in the universe? You are the universe, in a specific place and time, looking out from particular eyes, experiencing existence from this unique vantage point. Once you truly feel this, not as a concept, but as lived reality, the question of whether others understand you becomes irrelevant. How could they fully understand? They are the universe looking out from different eyes, having different experiences, operating from different levels of consciousness. Understanding, in the sense of complete comprehension, is impossible between separate beings. But connection, resonance, recognition, these are possible when you stop trying to be understood and simply allow yourself to be. The old you needed validation because it believed itself to be separate and insufficient. The new you, the one emerging through this painful transformation, knows itself as part of the whole, complete in its incompleteness, perfect in its imperfection. This self doesn't need anyone's approval to exist. It doesn't need everyone's comprehension to be valid. It simply is, flowing with the current of life, changing with each moment, dying and being reborn with each breath. Will you find your tribe? Will you eventually encounter others who speak your language, who have walked similar paths, who recognize the territory you're navigating? Perhaps. And those connections, when they come, will feel like coming home after a long journey. But even if you walk alone, even if no one ever fully understands the transformation you've undergone, you will have gained something no external relationship can provide: sovereignty over your own being, authority over your own experience, trust in your own unfolding. This is what Watts meant when he spoke of the wisdom of insecurity. Security based on external validation is no security at all. It depends on the ever-changing opinions and perceptions of others. True security comes from within, from knowing that no matter how much you change, no matter how many identities you shed, no matter how isolated the journey becomes, there is something in you that remains constant, not a fixed self, but the awareness itself, the consciousness that watches all transformations without being transformed, the presence that experiences all change while remaining present. So if you find yourself in that lonely space between worlds, no longer fitting in where you used to belong, but not yet arrived where you're going, know this: you are exactly where you need to be. The discomfort is the work. The isolation is the initiation. The pain of being misunderstood is the price of authenticity. And though the old you might have fled from this difficulty back into the comfort of conformity, the new you, emerging quietly, insistently, undeniably, knows that some journeys must be walked alone, not forever, but for now. And now is all there ever is. Let the old self die. Let the people who cannot understand drift away. Let the familiar comforts dissolve. What remains after everything false has been burned away is what you've been searching for all along: the truth of your own being, simple and complete, needing nothing, lacking nothing, just this, just here, just now. And that is quite enough. Thank you for being part of this exploration. If these teachings resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Where in the world are you watching from? And what part of this message spoke to you most deeply? Your engagement helps spread this wisdom to others who need to hear it.